Hey guys, it's your favorite park ranger again. Some of you have asked how I got started being a park ranger. It's actually a pretty interesting story, one that really started my journey with the Park Service and sets the tone for the rest of my career. So after graduating high school, I started trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I thought about college, but ultimately dismissed the idea. I was a solid B student, and the thought of going back to school seemed terrible. I'd been volunteering as an assistant scoutmaster, working part-time at the community pool, and started thinking it might be nice to be doing something in the woods. I'd never considered the park services, but when I found a flyer on a bulletin board while I was taking some of the kiddos on a hike, I thought I might have found something to try out. Wanted, fire watch tower operator, high school diploma, reference is a must, outdoor skills a plus, ability to stay in the woods for 90 days, an absolute must. $4,800 at the end of 90 days with the potential to re-enroll with good service. Contact Ranger Station A for inquiries. I did a little more than call the station. Once I had concluded the hike and the kids were back in their minivans and compact cars with their parents, I went to Station A to inquire in person. There were a couple of bored-looking rangers sitting around, but after some questions and some finger-pointing, I was directed to Ranger Thurman, someone who would eventually be my boss. He shook my hand, taking in my Scoutmaster garb, and asked about my credentials. I explained that I was an assistant Scoutmaster, a lifeguard, an avid hiker, and an amateur rock climber, and that I was looking for something to give me a chance to think about my next step in life. Thurman had laughed. "Well, 3 months is a long time to think, kiddo. You sure you're up for it? It drives some of them stir-crazy. They end up naked in the woods by the time we find them." I told him I thought I could handle it, and he took my application and said he'd get back to me. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and it turned out to be him. "So it's been a slow season for sign-ups, but not a slow season for fires. The head ranger has actually opened up 3 decommissioned towers this season, so the need for help is at an all-time high. If you think you can handle yourself, I'm willing to give you a shot." Told him I'd be happy for the opportunity, and he told me to come to the station on Monday for orientation. Orientation was lengthy, but mostly shook out to staying alert, not getting distracted, and spending most of your time in the tower. You would be keeping watch in one of the 7 fire towers, the big metal structures that sat about 80 feet off the ground. Once a week, there would be a delivery of provisions. Nothing fancy, but very sustainable. The tower had power, thanks to a generator near the base, and gas for the week would be part of that weekly delivery. Other than that, we were free to do whatever we liked, as long as we were keeping watch. Speaking of keeping watch, I had my eye on a blonde in the 3rd row for most of the presentation. She looked like someone who laid out a lot, her skin tanned and her hair pulled back into a tail. I wondered what tower she was going to be in, and whether I might strike up a friendship with her while we were assigned here. Don't hold it against me. I was young, and most of my brain was earmarked for one thing and one thing only. I wanted to speak with her after the orientation had ended, but she rushed off and I never got the chance. I figured I'd get another chance when they sent us our assigned towers, but no such luck. A week later, I got orders to report to the Fringe Trail, Route A, and Thurman was waiting for me with a pack of gear and some final instructions. "There's a radio in there. Keep it going. If you run into any trouble, call the station immediately. We don't usually hire kids who aren't past 25, but we're short, and I'll be honest, I got a good feeling about you. If you make it through the 90 days, I might have something more permanent, if you're interested. You've got the skill set I usually look for when hiring rangers for my team." I told him I'd think about it, but right then I was only interested in getting to the tower and getting set up. "Tower's at the end of the trail. You can't miss it. It's about 2 miles in, so I hope you packed light." I had, and I came to the tower at about 3 o'clock after a pretty easy hike through the park. I'd seen the fire towers from a distance, and I knew that most of them were on the edges of the park, so they could see the more remote areas on the fringes of the recreation area. The fire watch was less for camping areas or swimming holes, and more for the scrublands and the untraveled areas. We were watching for lightning strikes, stray cigarettes from inexperienced hikers, and people who think they're ready for more rigorous camping, but are less prepared than they think. I found the tower easily enough, and to my surprise, it had a ramp leading up to it, as opposed to a ladder. After 2.5 hours on the trail, it was a nice surprise. The observation deck wasn't anything fancy, but I hadn't expected it to be. A single bed, a kitchenette, some paperback books on a shelf, a lot of glass that overlooked the woods. There looked to be a river nearby, a little gorge off to the left, a lot of green trees waving hello. All in all, wasn't a bad view for a few months, and I was looking forward to seeing what lay within the depths of those woods. It was getting dark, so I settled in, watching the sun sink below the horizon, when the radio crackled and I heard Ranger Thurman call for a check-in. "Tower 3, checking in," I said when my turn came, and as I set the radio down, I tuned out the rest of them. 1 day down, 89 to go, I thought. I turned the switch on for the lights and went to check out the paperbacks on the shelf as I looked for something to do. I had my phone, but the reception here was spotty at best. There was no Wi-Fi out here, not like I'd expected there to be, and as I found a Dean Koontz novel I hadn't read before, I heard the radio crackle as someone called someone else by name, clearly looking for some company. I tuned it out and kept reading, but after a while, I heard other people inviting people to go to different channels on the radio. It appeared that a few of them were attempting to start a party line, which was just as well because the book I'd picked was kind of dull. I twisted through the channels, listening to the chatter from the other 7 towers, but I didn't really feel moved to chime in on any of the conversation. They were talking about sports or video games or movies, and most of them weren't talking about anything I really had an interest in. I twisted off Channel 4 when I heard the subject matter, and I couldn't believe that 2 of them were doing that right out in the open on an open channel. They had known each other for a couple of hours, tops. Get a room, for God's sakes. That's how I landed on Channel 7 and heard an unsure voice that would be my company for the next few months. "Hello? Anyone there?" "Tower 3's here. Who's this?" "Gretchen, from Tower 13. I'm glad somebody found me here. I felt like I was getting lost in the chatter of the other towers." Tower 13 wasn't one I was familiar with. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was someone playing a game, and I was hopeful that it was the cute girl from orientation. I didn't know what tower she had been sent to, but I was confident that she had a radio too. "Well, Gretchen from Tower 13, how did you find the conversation on the other channels?" "Pretty dull, honestly. They chattered about sports or movies or whatever. It's the same every year, to be fair. They just talk about boring things and spend the next 3 months ignoring all the natural beauty around them." I leaned back in my bunk, deciding I liked her even more. "And how do you like the beauty of nature?" "I like it a lot. There's a warren of rabbits within easy view of my tower, and I love watching them come out when they feel safe. They nibble and hop around. It's pretty adorable. There's a nest not too far from the warren of some hawks that seem to come back every year to nest. I know the one this year is the same because he's got the same tail stripe like the little one from last year. I'd have to break out my binoculars and have a look around when the sun came up. I would love to spend my days watching the deer or the birds who made the area their home. Gretchen was starting to sound more and more like my kind of girl, and as we talked about nature and hiking and whatnot, I watched the night slip by until I realized it was almost 2 a.m. "Hey, I better get some sleep," I told her. "Don't want to sleep through any potential fires tomorrow." "Oh, I didn't realize it was so late. Well, when you want to talk, hop on Channel 7. Someone seems to have left a radio here, so I find myself with 2. I'll keep one on the main channel and one on 7, just for you." I smiled, wishing her good night, and swapped back to Channel 1. It seemed I had made a friend, and it was a friend who would fill my evenings with conversation for the next few months. The next couple of weeks seemed to fly by. I spent my days hiking to various things, checking on hikers that Dispatch had sent me out after, going to reported fires in the area. It was a dry summer, so fires in the park were strictly prohibited, and even once to check on a drunk that someone had reported wandering near my tower. Mostly, however, I sat in my tower and watched for fires. It was a big year for fires too, but not that early in the season. This was June, and we all knew that the need to watch wouldn't really be dire until July. That was when attendance would be at its highest, and we'd need to keep our eyes peeled for smoke day and night. Those are always the worst weeks, Gretchen confided. I've seen more fire and rescue come in July than any other month. Last year, a family accidentally set their tent on fire by not putting out their campfire and burned up a big section of the woods in the process. They all died, which was sad, but they should have been more careful. We talked a lot more about fires that night, and I remember it being the end of June because I thought it was our 3-week anniversary. Silly, I know, since we weren't even dating, but I felt like she wouldn't have minded. I hadn't really done much besides a little bit of chatter with the other towers, and it was rare for me to swap my radio over to Channel 1 again before about 2 a.m. after final check-in. I spent most of my evenings with Gretchen, and I felt like she was as glad for the company as I was. "Hey, what do you do when you aren't in a fire tower?" I asked on a whim. There was silence for a moment before Gretchen finally got back to me. "I don't know, not much I suppose. Usually just come back for another season." "Well, would you want to do something after the season is over?" I asked, holding my breath as I waited for her response. You're sweet, but I just don't think we'd work out like that." I felt a little disappointed, but I understood. "I get it, you're probably married or something out in the real world. I get it." "Oh, no, it's nothing like that. It's just, this is kind of my life. I come back season after season because I love this place. The tower is more of a home to me than the one I came from, and I can't imagine anywhere but here." "That's fair, but maybe we could at least go get a coffee or something and see how things go." She laughed. "I'd like that." It was the second week of July when the big fire happened that would lead me to meet Gretchen and understand why things wouldn't work between us. The official report said that it was started by an improperly extinguished campfire. Some coals had been burning under the dirt the campers had thrown on it, and it had caught and spread to a nearby field of very dry, tall grass. The woods went up quickly, the rain having been sparse since May. The fire was in a part of the park that wasn't really attended, mostly scrublands and little valleys, so that was good for evacuation. The bad news was that it was about 3 miles from my tower, and I was asleep when it got big enough for another tower to see and report it. By the time they reported it, however, I was out of the tower and running for my life. I had signed off at about 1:30, telling Gretchen I'd talk to her tomorrow, and when her less than melodic voice broke into my dreams about an hour later, I came up groggily from sleep. I was convinced I was still dreaming. I could smell smoke, I could hear the sounds of frantic animals as they fled, and I picked up my radio to see how she had gotten in touch with me and what the problem was. I stood up, asking her what was wrong, when I saw the fire coming closer and closer to my tower. I started to turn back to Channel 1, apparently having passed out with the radio on Channel 7, but Gretchen came back on to tell me that it was already reported. "If you don't leave right now, you won't get a chance. The fire is spreading quicker than normal, and it's going to cut you off if you aren't careful. Get your boots on and go." I threw my boots on, grabbed my hiking pack, and barely remembered to grab the radio before I ran out into the night. I swapped to 1 and tried to call it in, but the fire must have knocked something out because none of the channels gave me anything but harsh static. I turned back to 7 and started heading away from the fire, making my way up a stream pretty close to the tower. If I could get into the stream, I might be safe, but if it boxed me in, then it could also be stuck there, with nowhere to go. "Cut north," the radio said, and I almost dropped it. I'd forgotten I'd brought it with me, and as I fumbled my compass out and gained my bearings, I headed north. I couldn't understand why fire and rescue wasn't already on the scene. The fire was big enough to be seen by more than just my tower, but I put it out of my mind as I headed towards the river. "A little more east," Gretchen said. "Not too much. There you go. Keep heading that way and you'll miss the fire." I could see it coming up my right side, the heat baking off it enough to make me squint. I hadn't realized that it was that dry out here, but I was quickly being hemmed in by the fire. I needed a way out, but I didn't know if I could make it before I was trapped. Go east through the creek and look for the tower. Once you make it there, you should be safe. Which tower? I asked, coughing as the smoke hit my throat. It's mine. It's 13. Just make it here. It should be outside the fire line. I kept running, coughing as I tried to get away from the spreading heat. Gretchen helped me, telling me which way to go. When I stumbled into the dry creek, she told me to get up and run, or I'd get stuck in there. The flames were coming on strong, eating up the dry ground like a hungry beast, and I scrambled out of the dry bed and saw the top of a tower against the purple sky. It was dark, but maybe that made it easier for her to see me. It wasn't until I came to the base of the tower that I had my doubts. The tower was old, rickety even, and looked like this wasn't the first fire it had seen. It sat in a clump of new trees, the ground around it scraggy and disturbed, and I couldn't see a thing up top. On the side, the numbers nearly unintelligible, was a faded 13. "Are you in there?" I asked, hesitating before just climbing this death trap to see someone I was beginning to doubt was there. "Yeah, come on up." Something moved then. Something slithered behind the windows. And suddenly, I thought I might have been safer with the fire. It was nothing substantial, just a quick trailing of mist, but it was something, and it filled me with an insatiable dread. I should not be here, my mind yelled. I should be somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere with people. And as I took a step away, I heard Gretchen again come from the radio. "What's wrong? Getting cold feet?" I didn't answer. I took a step away, but as I did, something stepped out onto the observation deck of the tower. It was too dark to see, its body made of midnight, but I could see eyes looking down at me, and they looked anything but friendly. "Come up," called Gretchen, her voice coming from the whatever it was, like a recording. "Come up. I can't wait to see you." Just then, a spotlight hit me, and the thing screeched like it had been shot. "Don't move," said a loudspeaker from the helicopter overhead. "We'll drop a ladder for you." I took one more look at the tower, but whatever it had been wasn't there anymore. They helped me into the helicopter, and it wasn't until we took off that my heart rate hit something like normal. All in all, the fire burned about 80 acres, but fire and rescue got water on it quickly enough and stopped it from spreading. There were no fatalities, though the tower I was in did need to be completely rebuilt. If I had been in there 10 minutes longer, they would have been cleaning up my remains with a shovel. At least that's what the park rangers said. I got pulled into the head ranger's office after the EMTs checked me out, and we had a long talk about how I had managed to get out of my tower in time, make it past the fire line, and still not call it in. I told him how the radio hadn't been functioning properly, and I'd simply run for my life. He commended me for my quick thinking when it came to getting out of danger, and seemed impressed with my performance through the Firewatch program. "Given that your tower was destroyed, we can't exactly send you back. We'll have to have the closest 2 towers keep an eye on your area, but I do have something if you're interested in a job." He had an open junior ranger position. It was part-time, minimum wage, and probably would come with a lot of overtime, but he promised me if I toughed it out for a year and passed all the training courses involved, he would promote me to full ranger after that year. Despite almost being burned to death and caught by a something or another, I still liked the woods and wanted to work there. I agreed, and he was as good as his word. A year later, I was a full park ranger, and a few weeks into my stint as junior ranger, the orders came for us to tear down the old Firewatch towers. I knocked Tower 13 down myself, and it felt pretty good. So that's my story. Maybe it isn't as weird as I thought it was, but it was pretty weird for me. If you want more, let me know. I'm sure I have some more weird tales from my past in one of Georgia's largest state parks. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story? Or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.